Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Carney's Liberal government introduces legislation to cut down barriers to internal trade. The same week, Trump imposes 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum. Plus, the world's most powerful man and one of the world's richest publicly feuding. President Trump threatens to cut Elon Musk's government contracts, while Musk accuses Trump of being listed in the Epstein files. And Alberta's Kananaskis Golf Club preps for some high-profile players as it gears up for the G7 summit.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Liberal government is granting itself new powers to quickly push ahead major projects the federal cabinet deems to be in the national interest. Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc tabled legislation in the House of Commons today. It would give Ottawa the authority to draw up a list of large projects it wants to prioritize and expedite their federal approval.
What's encouraging from the First Minister's meeting in Saskatchewan is that many provinces came together in support of projects that would stretch across provincial boundaries. So, for example, the Western and Arctic Corridor would be an example, or the Energy East Partnership. That's Energy East Partnership, not pipeline, to be clear. And that's an example where that consensus is forming, understanding that we need to work together in order for this to happen. Much more, of course, needs to be done.
The Assembly of First Nations will hold an emergency meeting to discuss the proposed bill's implications, and there's concern about the potential impact on consultations with First Nations. The Carney government also introduced legislation aimed at removing barriers to internal trade by recognizing provincial and territorial rules at the federal level. The bill also looks to recognize provincial and territorial licensing and certification for some workers so that someone licensed to work in one province is assumed to be licensed at the federal level. Prime Minister Mark Carney has promised to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers by Canada Day. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has accepted an invitation from Prime Minister Mark Carney to attend the G7 summit in Alberta this month. Modi says India and Canada will work together to, quote, renewed vigor, that is. Tensions between both nations have been high ever since former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau alleged agents of the Indian government were involved in the killing of a Sikh activist on Canadian soil 2 years ago. The G7 summit runs from June 15th through the 17th. And during the G7, it's entirely possible that U.S. President Donald Trump, who is an avid golfer, might want to play a few holes at the Kananaskis Country Golf Club. Back in 2002, when Alberta hosted the G8, U.S. President George Bush went for an early morning run around the course, and former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien played 4 holes. The club's general manager has some very fond memories.
President Bush says, Darren, he says, I have to tell you, you live and work in the most beautiful place I've ever seen. And I just thanked him and just said it was an honor to have him and all the other world leaders here. And he made his way in and goes out onto the patio. I asked our pro if he could get the shop open. He's like, done. So I go out, and what was probably only 10 seconds felt like 10 minutes with him and President Asner and President Bush in a serious conversation. And they paused their conversation, turned to me, and I said, gentlemen, sorry to interrupt, just want to let you know that the golf shop's open. And President Bush says, President Asner, you met Darren Robinson, the general manager of the golf course? And President Asner says, yeah. He says, we were talking for 10 minutes before you got here. And so then the three of us start talking, and then Tony Blair comes over, and President Bush introduced me to Tony Blair, and I'm like, somebody pinch me. You know, having something like this in your backyard, you know, you hope that there's an opportunity to have some similar and memorable experiences and moments. You know, and if they happen, great, that would be wonderful. And if they don't, they don't.
Well, Donald Trump's relationship with one of his closest allies appears to be fractured as he and Elon Musk's public feud rapidly escalates. Trump and Musk's alliance took off like one of SpaceX's rockets. It was supercharged and soared high, and then it blew up. The spectacular flameout Thursday peaked as Trump threatened to cut Musk's government contracts, and Musk claimed that Trump's administration has not released all the records related to sex abuser Jeffrey Epstein because Trump is mentioned in them. Here is Zeke Miller with the Associated Press.
It is hard to overstate just how significant that is, not just for the future direction of the Trump administration and the Republican Party, but also key elements of the American defense industrial sector. Tensions have been brewing between Elon Musk and the president really from the moment Elon Musk got to the White House. He was a little bit of an Icarus. He seized the limelight and challenged Donald Trump sort of as the most visible person in the Trump administration, which is never someplace that a Trump staffer wants to be in. And then from there came the policy disagreements, particularly around things like EV mandates and tax credits, which benefit Elon Musk's personal businesses.
And he only developed the problem when he found out that we're going to have to cut the EV mandate, because that's billions and billions of dollars.
And this may be one of those moments where there's a precipitous break and maybe the floodgates open, and that the direction of this administration from today forward may look a lot different than it has been over the last 130 odd days.
Today marks the 81st anniversary of D-Day. June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed 5 beaches off the coast of Nazi-occupied France. The invasion used the largest ever armada of ships, troops, planes, and vehicles to breach Hitler's defenses in Western Europe. 4,400 soldiers were killed on D-Day itself. In the ensuing Battle of Normandy, 73,000 Allied forces were killed and 153,000 wounded. Glenn Miller with the Lethbridge Military Museum reminds us peace comes at a price.
Canadians today, we have forest fires and they just break out. War breaks out, but peace doesn't break out. Peace has to be earned, and there's a price to pay for that monetarily and in lives. So if it's worth fighting for, it's worth dying for. But today, we want to make sure that their sacrifice is not being in vain by forgetting. So it's important for all Canadians to pass that torch and educate ourselves what their great deed was done and make sure it's passed on.
The exact German casualties from D-Day invasion are unknown, but historians estimate between 4,000 and 9,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing. The war in Europe ended less than a year later in May of 1945. A baby born prematurely and infected with measles has died in southwestern Ontario. Ontario Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Kieran Moore, announced the news this week. He says the infant got the virus from their mother, who was not vaccinated against the highly contagious disease. Since the province's measles outbreak began last fall, the majority of people who have been infected are infants, children, and adolescents. Meanwhile, in rural Ontario, a group of Mennonite women are helping to quell some of the fears around this measles outbreak. Catalina Friesen drives a bus outfitted as a walk-in clinic to Aylmer, Ontario, every Thursday that serves Mennonites in rural Ontario, where there are, quote, a lot of scared families.
We had a mom with her little girl come in with cold symptoms. We masked and gloved and did our thing, and mom was just worried that she was going to get the measles, but she presented as a cold. The 5-year-old ended up getting measles that night, so it was really scary for her.
I think that it's important to take into consideration the history and the origins of the Mennonite community and their experience with different government systems from the outset, hundreds of years ago. And that always plays a role in how communities through generations perceive different government systems, including public health, education, social services. And so with measles as the context, public health has a mandate and needs to respond in certain ways. And when there's mistrust from different communities, that becomes difficult for them. But I do think that language is really important when we speak to individuals and or groups who have had maybe less than positive experiences with different public systems, including healthcare, to really help them to understand what the purpose and what the goal is of the interaction.
The group of Friends of Medicare says it's hearing concerns from seniors in Lethbridge about their access to health care this weekend at Live Well Showcase. Executive Director Chris Galloway says this Seniors Week, they've listened to stories of seniors and their families having trouble obtaining family doctors, continuing care, and surgeries. A release was sent out Friday by Friends of Medicare denouncing the provincial government for what they say are efforts to privatize an already underfunded and under-resourced public health care system.
We want to celebrate seniors and respect our elders this week, but also we think they deserve better. Alberta seniors aren't getting the care they need, especially in terms of long-term care. So we've long been calling for the return of the seniors advocate. So there's a place for seniors to go when they're experiencing issues accessing the care they need, but also improving continuing care regulations, something the government did the opposite of. They've removed minimum hours of care from long-term care homes. They've privatized home care, and it's not meeting the needs of seniors. And these are the folks who built our province, built our communities, who are now not getting the care that they need, and we don't think that's acceptable.
In May, physicians at the Chinook Regional Hospital's emergency department warned residents to expect longer wait times due to decreased physician coverage. There are only 2 institutions in Alberta to offer the new power line technician apprenticeship program, and Lethbridge Polytechnic is one of them. Kevin Wilbur, Dean of the Polytechnic Centre for Trades and Technologies, says the institution trains professionals in the field and provides the skills and hands-on experience needed to work in Alberta's expansive electrical utilities sector. Wilbur explains the work includes maintaining existing power lines and maintaining overhead, underground, and transmission distribution systems.
They're the people out there when the winter storm blows down a power line, or the heat of summer gets unbearable and the heavy demand of air conditioning in our homes and our businesses overloads the system. This is about training new people entering the trade to do a very dangerous job safely and efficiently. Some years ago, the industry approached Lethbridge College at the time to develop a pre-employment training program grounded in practical applications. The main reason they were looking for this kind of training was because the job is dangerous, the working conditions can be very challenging, and people were not entering the trade. Lethbridge College has developed an excellent pre-employment program for those looking to enter the trade. The electrical infrastructure in Alberta and across North America is becoming more and more important as the demand for that energy increases. So we need to make sure that we have the right people in place. Lethbridge Polytechnic is committed to preparing learners and shaping our community with dynamic, responsive programs. We feel it's important to listen to industry and to respond in the best interest of the community.
This 4-year apprenticeship consists of 3 years of classroom learning and a 4th year requiring additional workplace hours to reach program completion. Green Acres Foundation celebrated Seniors Week, as each year the first week of June is dedicated to celebrating one of Alberta's greatest treasures, our senior citizens. With soup, barbecue, and music, seniors gathered for a fun day. During the party, a friendly soup competition was also held. The winning soup will be featured on their fall-winter menu.
Every year we try to do something different. This year we decided, let's do something kind of fun. We are always told by our residents how much they love the soups. So this year we decided, let's have the chefs do a signature soup, some sort of soup, and then we thought, then whatever one won is going to be on our fall menu. So it's just kind of fun. It gets the staff involved, gets the residents involved. It was really good. I got to try them after. I think they were all winners. Okay, every one of them. Really important for all of Alberta because seniors are the ones who built this province. They worked hard, okay, and so they made it easier for the coming generations, the generations after them. So I think it's just fitting that we should be honoring seniors every day, but it's just fitting that the province has recognized this 1 week that we can all honor seniors and thank them.
And who doesn't love a good soup? Judges for the competition included Mayor Blaine Higgin, Deputy Chief Fire Wes Borland, and residents representing their senior community. Lethbridge is vying for $100,000 and the title of Canada's most active community. To be a part of this participation community challenge, today Lethbridge Family Services held an interpretive nature hike in Pincher Creek with staff and newcomers. Najib Manjel, Manager Communications Connections LFS, says the experience is designed to help newcomers to Canada not only explore the outdoors, but feel a true sense of connection to their new home.
The first step is to just win the money, win the challenge, bring the money to the community, and then from there we're going to be collaborating and connecting with other not-for-profit organizations that are supporting similar activities like us, and we're hoping to collaborate with them and partner with them on some of those community-level activities and use that money towards that. The biggest component of this hike is the history of Indigenous people and their connection to the land. We take about 30 individuals. They are from different categories of newcomers, from refugees, independent, and from all walks of life. The hike, it's about 6 kilometers one way, so a total of 12 kilometers. Once we complete the hike, then of course we'll put together a testimonial from participants, and we'll put together a report and photos, and that goes into the challenge. So I'm hoping by the end of July, sometime by the end of July, we will know that if we're the winners or not.
Communities across Canada are competing in the Community Challenge. A tug carrying a salvage specialists and special equipment is expected to arrive at the location of a huge cargo ship burning off the coast of Alaska. The ship, called the Morning Midas, was carrying about 3,000 vehicles to Mexico when it caught fire in waters off Alaska's Aleutian Island chain Tuesday. The ship's management company, London-based Zodiac Maritime, says the crew is assessing the ship's condition, and a separate tug with firefighting and ocean towage capabilities is being arranged. In the meantime, officials are using the ship's onboard satellite-connected systems to monitor it. The ship is currently located about 490 kilometers southwest of Adak Island. Air quality warnings are in place for much of Ontario because of smoke from wildfires burning elsewhere in Canada. Environment Canada says the smoke from fires scorching Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta is causing poor air quality and reduced visibility in regions including Fort Hope and Kenora, Ontario. High concentrations of wildfire smoke have moved south and could remain in place for the next several days. Residents are being told to consider limiting the time outdoors and be mindful of smoke exposure symptoms. 2 people have also been charged with starting wildfires in Saskatchewan. Premier Scott Moe says one of the suspects is connected to a fire around La Ronge. That blaze is responsible for about half of up to the 15,000 Saskatchewan residents forced to evacuate their homes. Moe says virtually all of the wildfires are human-caused, and some of them were intentionally set. Unfortunate for sure. Here in southern Alberta, we're experiencing a different kind of heat. Southern Alberta was the hot spot in the province. Medicine Hat was sitting at 28 degrees this afternoon, and Lethbridge wasn't that far behind at 26, heading for that 28. But how's the weekend looking? Well, I'll be right back to tell you. Well, a fairly decent weekend is ahead of us. As Friday, we were headed towards that 28 degrees. Quite a bit cooler, though, on Saturday, only reaching that high of 22. Also, 30% chance of showers tomorrow. But after that, Sunday should be back up to nice, warm, summer-like weather, high of 26 degrees. Monday, reaching those 30s, high 32 degrees, and then back to 27 on Tuesday. All 3 of those days nice and clear. We could expect some showers to begin, though, on Tuesday night, 60% chance of showers then. Lasting over into Wednesday, 60% chance of showers, high 24, and then 24 also expected on Thursday with a mix of sun and clouds. So not bad conditions whatsoever, considering the average high for this time of year, 21. We're actually getting well above that. 8 degrees is the average low for this time of year. 32 was the record high on this day. That happened back in 1972. And in 1912, we were sitting at -2 for Lethbridge, which was the record low on this day. Sun rose this morning at 5:26, sunset this evening right at 9:35 p.m. 1 minute more sunlight today than we saw yesterday, so that is 16 hours and 9 minutes of daylight. Okay, on the west coast tomorrow, Victoria sitting at 24, 19 though, the closer you are to that water there, it's mainly sunny skies. Sunshine in Vancouver, high of 21, but 29 further inland you go. 20 for the high in Edmonton, seeing sunny skies and some local smoke there. Calgary sitting at 21 with a mix of sun and cloud, and winds up to 40 kilometers per hour, so 20 to 40 gusts. 19 degrees is the expected high tomorrow in Saskatoon. Saskatoon seeing clouds, haze, 30% chance of showers, and could see a risk of a thunderstorm. Regina also seeing clouds, haze, chance of showers, risks of thunderstorms, also up to 70 winds expected in Regina tomorrow, 19 for the high there, and a beautiful 25 in Winnipeg. But guess what? Winnipeg could see some showers as well as a risk of some thunderstorms. Now, as we get into Ontario, we are seeing air quality statements in effect for both Toronto and Ottawa due to the wildfires there, the wildfire smoke reducing visibility, causing poor air quality. But other than that, above that smoke, we're seeing some sunshine there. 25 for the high in both of those cities there. 27 is where Montreal sits tomorrow with the risk of some thunderstorms, and could see some afternoon showers there as well. Lots of rain expected in Fredericton tomorrow. In fact, 15 to 25 millimeters. Could see some thunderstorms as well. High of 18 degrees, 20 for the high in Halifax. Showers there expected. Charlottetown seeing fog retreating into the coast in the morning, high of 18, and some showers expected there as well. And 5 to 10 millimeters of rain expected in St. John's, with also some fog retreating into the coast in the morning, high of 22 degrees there. There you have it. That is your forecast. Canada's unemployment rate rose for the third consecutive month in May, even as 8,800 jobs were added to the economy. Stats Canada says the national jobless rate grew 1/10 of a point from April, sitting now at 7%. Stats Canada says the growth marks the highest unemployment rate since 2016, outside pandemic years. The nation's manufacturing industry was hit hard in April, losing roughly 12,000 jobs last month. Vancouver-based Lululemon hopes to weather new and possibly incoming tariffs by passing along some of the costs to customers. Chief Financial Officer Megan Frank told analysts the price increases will be modest in nature and only applied to a small portion of its athletic wear offerings. Lululemon shares tumbled 23% in after-hours trading on the news that the company's profits slid in its latest quarter. The retailer says its first quarter net income totaled almost $315 million US, down from $321 million US in the same period a year earlier. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 86 points to 26,429. The Dow was up 433 points to 42,762. The S&P 500 was up 61 points to 6,000 even, and the Nasdaq was up 231 points to 19,529. West Texas Intermediate oil was up $1.41 to $64.78 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 10 cents to $3.78 US. Gold was down $42.98 to $33.0984 US an ounce, and silver was up 30 cents to $35.96 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.90 per bushel, barley is at $6.90, canola is at $15.61, and corn is at $8.20 per bushel. Live cattle June contract was up $3.40 to $226.30. Feeder cattle August contract was up $1 even to $310.15, and lean hogs June contract was up $1.77 to $102.62. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 73 cents US.
Recapping one of our top stories, the Prime Ministers have unveiled a bill to make Canada a superpower. Mark Carney's government introduced legislation Friday that would grant it new powers to quickly push forward major projects the federal cabinet deems to be in the national interest. Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc tabled legislation in the House of Commons today. It would give Ottawa the authority to draw up a list of large projects it wants to prioritize and expedite their federal approval. By-elections have been called, inquiries into AHS contract deals continue, and wait times for healthcare are getting worse. These important issues and more to talk about with Tyler Dawson, Alberta correspondent for the National Post, coming up next. Also, when you see news happening here or see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. Alberta has finally called 3 by-elections, one of them fairly big, as the leader of the opposition is still looking for a seat in the legislature. Also, hospital wait times getting worse, and wildfire evacuation orders are in place in parts of the province and all around the prairies. Tyler Dawson, legislative correspondent with the National Post, joins us once again to discuss it all. Tyler, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So, Tyler, Alberta has finally called 3 by-elections to replace the vacant seat in the legislature. And one of them is Edmonton, Strathcona, Rachel Notley's old seat, where Naheed Nenshi is planning to run. And some might forget that Nenshi, he has not had a seat in the legislature since becoming the NDP leader last year. It's hard to believe that you can even be the leader of a party without being in the legislature for so long. Is this unusual?
Yes and no. I mean, Mark Carney, the federal Liberal leader and Prime Minister, did not have a seat in the legislature for a couple of weeks. But it is true that Nenshi has been leader for, it's got to be almost a year at this point.
Yeah.
I think the year anniversary's got to be a few days from now. Or maybe, I don't know, I actually don't remember. It's blanking. I'm totally blanking on when he actually became leader.
Like
but at any rate,
getting close to that year mark.
Yeah, it's almost a year. So, he's missed out on a lot of the sort of cut and thrust of the legislature. How much does it matter if an opposition leader is in the legislature? Certainly a little bit. They're more accessible to the media. They get some clips from it. They can get involved in some of the controversy and scandal and stuff like that makes headlines. So there is obviously some value in the leader of the opposition being in the House. Generally, I mean, the bigger issue I think people would point to more often is if the government leader is not in the House, because then they're not available for questioning. It's a slightly different, texture to it, so to speak, if we're talking about the opposition leader here. But yeah, it's been a year. Rachel Notley had resigned and that seat was going to be vacant. And then there's about 6 months, I think, for the by-election to be called. And that would have been called, I think, in early January. And now we have actual plans are afoot to hold this election.
Right.
There's two
and there
others.
Are two other by-elections in place.
Yeah,
so maybe let's talk about those seats that are up for grabs.
Yeah, so the other one is Edmonton Ellerslie. This was held by Rod Loyola, who left the provincial NDP to run for the federal Liberals in the last election, the election we had, a month or so ago. And he ended up sort of dropping out of that because of comments he had made about Israel in years past. So that seat is sitting vacant. And then the last one is Olds Didsbury Three Hills, which is the seat of former Speaker Nathan Cooper. I think he'd held that seat for 13 years or something like that. But he is now moving to Washington to be Alberta's trade representative down there. So his seat is also vacant. That's going to go to the UCP. I don't think that should shock anybody that the NDP are not going to win that race in Olds. The other two are certainly a little bit more open, shall we say. Edmonton Strathcona almost certainly to go to the NDP. It's been an NDP seat federally and provincially for a very, very long time. And Edmonton Ellerslie, maybe a little bit more of a toss-up, a bit more of a suburban Edmonton riding, certainly held by the NDP, as is every other riding in Edmonton, but a little bit more of a battleground there, perhaps. So that'll be something to watch, I think, maybe more closely in some ways than the other two races, where the outcome is a bit more of a foregone conclusion.
Right, exactly. And when are those by-elections called for?
June 23rd, and then the official results will be out on July 3rd. So, a few weeks to go before actual voting day in those ones.
Okay. Tyler, there seems to be a bit of a softening in the relationship between Alberta and Ottawa. So initially, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith laid out a list of demands for changes in federal government policy. But then after that first ministers' meeting, Mark Carney said that another pipeline might be a possibility. And then Danielle Smith obviously welcomed that change in tone, but she still has this list of demands, and there isn't a ton of indication yet that there's going to be a change. So, Tyler, what have you heard on this front?
Well, the Alberta-Ottawa relationship sort of goes through some of these periods of softening, as you said. And right now, the federal government was sort of elected on this mandate of building infrastructure, getting things done, revitalizing the Canadian economy in the face of trade threats from the United States, things like that. And so the premiers have been talking about a lot of this for a while. Obviously, the Alberta premiers, not just Danielle Smith, but Jason Kenney as well, Rachel Notley when she was premier, have all sort of been talking about Alberta infrastructure and pipelines and oil sands mines and all this kind of stuff. But there does seem to be a little bit of a moment right now where there's some more openness in other parts of the country to some of these projects. That doesn't mean that any of them are going to happen. Obviously, there's private capital that needs to be found for a lot of these projects. There does need to be consultations with neighboring provinces, with Indigenous groups. I mean, none of this is a slam dunk right off the bat. And that's not just the case for Alberta's projects. That's the case for any major infrastructure project anywhere in the country. So it's not unique to us in that regard. But the fact that there is this bit more of a focus on infrastructure, a bit more openness to pipeline development, things like that. This is certainly a little bit of a change from the last 5-6 years in the Alberta-Ottawa relationship. Obviously, we go back 10 years, there was a lot more discussion about this when you had other projects in the work. You had Northern Gateway, you had Energy East, you had Keystone XL. These were all part of the public conversation until actually relatively recently. And so in that sense, yeah, there has been this softening. There does seem to be this openness towards it. But as you point out, there's this other list of demands. And, this includes getting rid of the ban on plastic straws, which, I don't know why that's such a massive policy priority for the Alberta government, but apparently it is. This includes the emissions cap on the oil and gas sector, which seems unlikely that the federal Liberals are going to really back down on that. So, this list of demands that Alberta's government wants are not necessarily going to be that popular with the Liberal government. They're not going to be that popular with governments in other parts of the country. They're not going to be that popular in some cases with other Canadians. So I don't think we are going to see sort of a carte blanche acquiescence across the board to these demands, which does set the stage for some sort of further confrontation between Alberta and the federal government. Maybe that looks like more of the same old that we've seen for the past decade. Maybe that looks like a separation referendum. A bit hard to say where either of those things are going to go at this point. But, this is not, they may be saying nice things, but this is not, a complete and total reset and everything's going to be hunky-dory from now on.
Okay, so changing gears here, the release of a report into the Alberta Health Services procurement scandal has been delayed until the end of September, and the province hired a former Manitoba judge to lead an inquiry into the scandal. So, Tyler, that report was supposed to be due at the end of May, but is now pushed back till the end of September. But this is just one of several investigations going on in this particular scandal.
That's right. Yeah, you've got the Auditor General is looking into it, and I believe the RCMP are looking into it as well. And of course, there's this court battle going on between the former CEO of Alberta Health Services and the government. So there's, a lot of sort of moving pieces, moving parts to this controversy, this scandal. And the benefit sort of an interim report would have been that we would have had some insight into what's going on that was beyond what's been reported in the media and beyond what's coming out in courtrooms. The courtrooms are places where they're working towards facts. You've got allegations on both sides, and those can be reported on, and people read about them. But a determination of truth is a little ways down the road in a court battle, generally speaking. So one of the benefits of getting this interim report is we would have had some insight from, as you say, a former Manitoba justice, would have had sort of the timeline, what happened, what we know happened, all those sorts of things. So. And of course, that part of the problem with the delay is that it looks suspicious. What is the government trying to hide is sort of one of the questions that people ask when they hear about these sorts of things. So the government's in a tough position on this because they don't at this point, I think, look particularly good. And there's been a lot of public pressure around it. The NDP opposition is making a lot of noise about it. They've been calling for an actual full public inquiry, which the government has so far rejected. So it's a bit of a tenuous political situation for the government right now. And so this delay, while it maybe gives the government a little bit of breathing room in the sense that they don't need to have to deal with the fallout from the report itself, it does make it look like there is something to hide. I think that's a reasonable assumption that a lot of people are making. So sticky situation, and everyone's waiting on these reports, and we're going to get them. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah. Are the opposition NDP also wanting the contents of the report to be released publicly as well?
Yeah, they're calling for the release of what has been done so far in the interim report, whether or not that report is, complete. They just want it out there. And again, you can see the political benefit to that, right? Like, no matter what that report shows, the NDP is going to be able to make something of it. And the federal or the provincial government's in the opposite position. So both have good political motivations for wanting it kept behind closed doors for now and wanting it released.
Okay. The Alberta government looking at new rules for school libraries, claiming that 4 books containing sexually graphic content were found in the school library. So this is likely to become controversial when you consider the drama over book bans that have taken place in places like the United States, for example. So Tyler, what's the province planning to do here?
They're planning to do a public consultation. I mean, this has become a bit of a fashion in Alberta where nothing happens without doing this public consultation. And public consultations, they're not to say they're bad, but they really do exist to marshal evidence for a position that the government already holds. I mean, no government is going out and doing public consultations and then completely changing their mind or doing something completely opposite of what you would have expected them to do in the first place. So they're doing a public consultation. There's a survey online. I think it's about 14 questions about what Albertans think about sexual content, basically, in books in school libraries. And in this case, you've got 4 graphic novels. They're all sort of coming of age graphic novels, and they all deal with, I've read 2 of them, and they deal with some pretty sort of heavy subject matter. And it's not just the sexual content that's heavy content. It deals with bullying and growing up in really religious households and gender identity and all those sort of explorations of adolescence. And so you can see, though, why it's become controversial. There are some fairly graphic parts of these books, and the other thing you should note is that these 4 books are also 4 of the ones that are targeted relatively regularly in the United States at the state and local levels when there have been similar laws put in place, rules put in place to allow the challenging of material in school libraries. But as you alluded to, this has been really controversial down there. I mean, school districts in Texas and Utah, for example, pulled the Bible from shelves, pointing to the graphic sexual content and the graphic violence in the Old and New Testament. They've reversed those decisions since, but you can see where this goes, right? I mean, this is not just about, does not need to be just about some of these particularly problematic books that one might identify. Ernest Hemingway's work gets caught up in this. Obviously, the Bible gets caught up in this. You can imagine that we're going to rehab the debate that we had 20 years ago, but whether magic in Harry Potter was leading to satanic influences on children, those kinds of things, right? So it's going to be very, very controversial. Whether the government likes that or not is a different question. I mean, they're probably happy to have that fight, but it is going to be controversial. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
Yeah. We do need to get to this really quickly. We know that the province is undergoing a major reorganization of the healthcare system. However, we have wait times right now continuing to get worse in Alberta hospitals. So what's the average wait time right now in the province, Tyler? It's nearly 4 hours or something?
Yeah, for more than 4 hours, I think, and quite a bit worse in a couple of the cities. I think Edmonton is up above 7, maybe, and things like that. And so these are the median wait times, not the average, which is notable just because you will have extreme outliers if you're doing an average. You'll have someone who comes in with obvious cardiac distress who waits for 30 seconds before they go in, and you'll have someone who comes in because they stubbed their toe and they're there for like 12 hours because they shouldn't be in the ER in the first place. So they run the medians on this to get at the times. And the important thing is, yeah, the wait times are bad, but the important detail is that they're getting worse. They're worse than they were in 2020. And wait times have been a problem for every Alberta government as long as I can remember, and they've always tried to tackle it, and I'm not sure anybody has really actually succeeded at that. But at the present moment, the Alberta government is going through this big reorganization of the healthcare system, breaking AHS, Alberta Health Services, into 4 pillars, acute care and community care and addictions care and long-term care. And so part of the premise of that was to make the healthcare system more efficient, faster, better care in less time. And so if you continue to see this sort of trend, that does pose a little bit of a political problem for the government, because there's some evidence for the opposition, the other parties going into the next election in 2027 to say, well, you did all this, you blew up the healthcare system, what do you have to show for it? So, obviously there's implications for each and every one of us if we end up in the hospital, if we're going to be waiting for 8 hours or whatever. But there's a political side to this too as well, down the road.
Yeah. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there are evacuation orders in effect for parts of the provinces. A dry spring now means that wildfires have broken out around the province, unfortunately, and it's not a good start to the season, but we've seen what's happened in recent years, particularly last year up in Jasper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been industrial shutdowns up north in the oil sands region because of fires nearby, although some of the plants have started back up, workers have returned to the job. As you say, there are evacuation orders in effect. If people are affected by those little PSA, people should take a look on the government website to find what sort of support for evacuees is available, because those supports and things like that do exist. But yeah, not a great start. I think everyone is watching this a little bit concerned and trying to keep an eye on the forecast, hoping that we're going to get a whole bunch of rain across the province in the next little while. And most of the fires right now do seem to be in sort of comparably remote parts of the province. But people still live there. It's small towns and communities are still up there, and are still affected by these things. So it's not just the big cities and towns. It's not just the Fort McMurrays, the Jaspers, the Slave Lakes, whatever that are affected by these things.
Yeah. Looks like we're out of time here, but Tyler Dawson, legislative correspondent with the National Post, thanks so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Canada has long been a pro-immigration nation. However, over the last few years of tough economic times, the polls show that Canadians are not happy with the current immigration system, and they want some change. But that might be easier said than done. So joining us for some expert analysis on this topic is Dr. Michael Bonner. He is a senior fellow at the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy and the author of the study, Repairing the Fray, Improving Immigration and Citizenship Policy in Canada. Long title there, but Dr. Bonner, welcome. Great to have you with us today.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Wonderful. Okay, so Dr. Bonner, what are the basic problems we're experiencing with our current immigration system? What are Canadians unhappy about?
There are two problems. The first is political. Everyone is sick and tired of a system that doesn't command confidence anymore. The second problem is the source of the first. The second problem is that this system that we have now no longer serves any kind of economic or cultural interest of our country. Or if it does, it serves them very, very poorly.
Okay. How did we get here then? When did Canada's immigration policies start to change for the worse?
Well, look, up until about 2015, we had a system that was, first of all, there was a consensus in favor of it. It was primarily economic immigration, namely newcomers were mostly getting jobs here before they arrived. They were mostly high wage, high skilled jobs. That's no longer the case. Since 2015, the number of low wage, low skilled immigration has drastically ramped up. This is the proverbial sort of seasonal worker program that has evolved into temporary sort of guest workers. The temporary foreign worker program is the name of it, and it has spiraled out of control. We now have companies that use foreign recruited labor essentially as a business model to keep wages low, prices low, and profits high. And this prices Canadians out of the market. It means that long established Canadians, especially young people trying to enter the labor market, they are competing unfairly. There's not a level playing field for those low wage entry level jobs. This is a source of great anger, I think, throughout the country. and there's no economic justification for it. Secondarily, there's the cultural element. Surveys have shown, polling has shown over the past several years that Canadians don't think that newcomers do enough to integrate into the country, into the cultures of our country, and that policy itself doesn't do enough to make that happen. That we don't expect enough, we don't demand enough from newcomers, and this has completely undermined the consensus that we had in favor of immigration. And unfortunately, I think it's also connected with there's sort of an attitude that took hold in the Trudeau years. The whole theory of a post-national state, of a country that has no culture. If you believe that, there's nothing into which to integrate in the first place, and there's no reason to try. And the result, we see before us now.
Your study takes a look at what other nations around the world are doing with their immigration policies. So which countries are getting the best results?
Well, in general, the best results come from recruiting persons from abroad who are generally younger, who have already been educated within the country in question. Australia is very good at this. We used to do this too. Young people who know the language, who have skills that we need, who are willing and able to work at above the median wage, at a higher wage, higher skill level. That's really the ideal way to do it. It benefits the host country. It benefits the immigrants. I've mentioned Australia. That's a great example of sort of general success, such as we once had. I mentioned other countries. Britain is an example that do this very poorly, and there are examples in there which we should not imitate. Sweden is an example of a country as well that has completely given up, or it had completely given up on economic and cultural immigration, and has had to effectively it's had to overreact by slamming the door, proverbially speaking. I don't think that we need to do that. I don't think that we should do that. I don't think we need to overreact to such an extent as we have seen. There are things that we should not imitate that I have mentioned. We're not there yet, and thank goodness we're not. What we need to aim for is we need to get more of a harmony between who wants to come here, the needs of the labor market, and then a little bit better at cultural integration.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask what we can learn from the countries that are doing it right, and sort of what's working, what isn't working well. You mentioned some countries that aren't doing it well either.
Exactly. Well, I mean, we have what is arguably a unique problem that I address in the study, and it's the temporary foreign worker program. Other countries do have these guest worker programs. They have them, but not to the extent that we do. It's very difficult to go anywhere in this country and find businesses normally in hospitality that make use of this program. I would say abuse this program as a business model in order to staff up in regions where you might normally be expected to pay a higher wage, to get people to do jobs that, again, should command a higher wage. But the reason they do that is simply because it's easier, because the government, effectively it amounts to a subsidy from the government, and secondarily because they want to keep prices artificially low, right? Now, the time to fix this, and we're not talking about a few thousand people. We're now into the millions. This is just a huge number, which I think a lot of Canadians would find shocking. The time to have addressed this problem, this was, it should have been done years, decades ago, and the Harper government did. Matters began to get out of control. There were a couple of scandals, and caps, sort of staged sort of phasing down of the program were introduced so as not to create too many shocks, but a gradual sort of ratcheting down of the program. Those were done away with from 2015 onward. The program ballooned, and now we're back to in the dying days of the last Trudeau government, caps were reintroduced. That program should be abolished. It should be phased down, and it should be abolished completely. And this should command a political consensus in this country. If I'm not mistaken, there's a petition to be tabled in the House of Commons imminently to do exactly that. Business groups will object. There's no question about that. It wouldn't be easy, but that needs to be done. We should be employing our own young people in entry-level jobs, career-starting jobs, for a higher wage than they might normally be able to get. And businesses need to invest in Canada.
Yeah, it's true. What's the current Canadian application process for prospective immigrants right now? We're told it's quite rare for in-person interviews.
Well, I mean, that could very well be the case. I mean, the way it's supposed to work for the economic classes is that you secure a job offer abroad through what's called express entry, and there's a point system, and it's various skills that are in demand and so forth are weighted in different ways. That's how it's supposed to go. But when you ask, what is the actual practice that's happening? Well, unfortunately, completely independent from any kind of public or parliamentary scrutiny, the Minister of Immigration, and various high-ranking officials within our immigration system have an extraordinary amount of discretion as to who to let in, how to adjust points values, what skills are held to be in demand, and who they judge to be admissible to the country. There could well be, if there is a waiving of this, a waiving of in-person interviews or a relaxation of a vetting process, which we've heard was the case toward the end of the Trudeau government. I think most Canadians would find that alarming. But one of the recommendations I make in the study is that we need to involve just a greater level of transparency and public scrutiny in the immigration process. This is why I've recommended a practice that is done in Norway. Every budget includes relevant labor market, housing, and immigration statistics to show how people are integrating, where job shortages and skills shortages may be, what kind of things are in demand, who's filling them, where they've settled, and what the state of the housing stock is. This is the kind of measure that would increase confidence, and and what you're describing, I think, is yet another example that tells me that what we need is not minor tinkering, but a more substantial overhaul.
Getting away from the jobs and more thinking about safety issues, many Canadians have serious concerns about immigrants not being properly screened or, for maybe cultural values integration. And, we sometimes see violent demonstrations or hatred being spread. So what needs to change in how we screen for this kind of thing?
Well, first of all, we have laws governing public protest, and we have customs that tell us, where these things ought to take place and where they shouldn't. It's kind of a new development that we're having these protests however well-meaning the anger may be, or however critical people may feel about events abroad, to hold public protests in just sort of people's neighborhoods simply to intimidate others. I mean, that's completely unacceptable. And we have laws available to us that we should be enforcing to crack down on this kind of on this kind of abuse.
Yeah.
If you are not a citizen and you are engaging in this kind of activity, and you have been found to have broken a law, I think that most Canadians would probably agree that that's completely unacceptable, and you shouldn't be here. Now, if you add to this problem some of the things that we've been hearing recently about how certain protesters who whatever sort of foreign conflict or event or problem that they're addressing abroad, that they also include some idea about how Canada is an illegitimate state, or that it should be destroyed or abolished, or shouting things like "death to Canada." These sorts of things should, and I think they need to be tested in court within the bounds of our respect for freedom of speech and so forth. If a crime has been committed, though, we need to enforce the law, right? And I feel that we have failed to do that. Not only for many of our own citizens who are involved in these acts of protest, and I think deliberate intimidation within Jewish neighborhoods or in front of schools and daycares and so forth. But if there are, when diaspora communities of perhaps non-citizens are being involved in this and possibly being manipulated abroad by hostile governments, we have a problem that we need to address, and I don't think that we have done enough. I don't think we've done enough to enforce our own laws. I don't think we need any new laws, but
maybe a better policy in place to deport individuals who maybe are discovered to be guilty of supporting terrorism or guilty of violent crime, that type of thing. That's
right, or genocide. I mean, the first time this came to the fore was in the 1990s with the Rwandan. Many of the architects of the Rwandan genocide found asylum in Canada, and they were only removed after due process. Of course, they were only removed something like 20 years later.
Oh my goodness!
That's remarkably slow. Like we have some kind of structural problem with this, but when serious allegations must be tested in court, but when people are found to have committed crimes, that's it as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Thanks so much for your time today, Dr. Bonner. We're out of time, but great having you on.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Dr. Michael Bonner is a senior fellow at the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy. You can read his study on immigration at aristotlefoundation.org. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.